Week 5 is almost under wraps for fantasy football. The good news, got some interesting waiver wire pickups in mind for you. The bad news is a lot of them are replacements for big time players who were injured this past week. So let's start with the injury report. The lead story here is the number one pick in all of fantasy, Justin Jefferson, did leave the game late. You might not have caught it if you tuned out because you just assumed that the Vikings wouldn't win, which they didn't. But towards the end of that game, Justin Jefferson kind of limped off the field. It looks like it might be a hamstring injury. He wasn't crumpled over on the ground, unable to walk or anything like that. He walked off, a little bit of discomfort, but he didn't come back. And so there's some thought this is a mild hamstring. You know how this goes with hammies. Might miss a week, 2 weeks, whatever the case is right now. You might have to prepare for life without Jettis in week 6. Now, we were already saying Jordan Addison looked like a great buy low last week. Well, obviously he steps up, might be the number one receiver. Again, this is assuming Jefferson does have to miss some time. Doesn't look like a long-term thing, if anything. The next man up would obviously be then KJ Osborne. He becomes interesting as somebody that you might need to stream. Even more interesting because of the fact that the Vikings do play the Bears next week. And if you're really reaching deep, not going to throw this out as a waiver wire suggestion, but if you're desperate, Brandon Powell did see more action. And the other big one is, again, an injury that was very underreported. You might not even know that it happened because in that Dolphins blowout win against the Giants, Devon Achane, who looked like he might just destroy fantasy this year, brace yourselves here, but it is possible he has a high ankle sprain. Again, this flew under the radar because, he just came out kind of nonchalantly after that play, and it was toward the end of the game. He didn't come back in. People thought, well, they don't need him anymore because of the score. And again, I have not seen all the media outlets report this, but there are some people who noticed that there was an injury here. So again, we're going to have to definitely monitor this closely. Raheem Mostert was already startable, and so if Achane does miss time, well, it just so happens Jeff Wilson is eligible to come off IR. He might be a guy you just go ahead and plug in there. And then another running back who got hurt. This one kind of stung because James Conner looked like he was on his way to a big game. And in fact, this injury occurred right after a big run, 30 plus yards, right before the end zone. Well, he went out and did not come back to the game. And that's obviously problematic because it was still the first half. Other concern here is that it's a knee injury. Never a good sign. So we're going to have to see what the outcome is. But right now, let's look at his backup, Emari Demercado. He has taken over the number 2 role over Keontae Ingram, who has done absolutely nothing in his time in the NFL. Demercado, somebody I will talk about more in a minute. At quarterback, Anthony Richardson once again left the game early, didn't come back. This time it was a shoulder injury. There's some talk that it could be a sprained AC joint. This is something very similar to Derek Carr. You remember a couple of weeks ago. Well, Carr just came right back, didn't even miss the game, although he probably should have based on the way he played in that first game back. Now it's different here with Richardson. This is a rookie, and this is a guy who runs a very physical player, as you can see why he's already been banged up twice in the early part of the season. They may not rush to put him back there. They have a capable veteran in Gardner Minshew. So I don't feel like if this is the injury that they're saying it might be, that Richardson is going to play in week 6. So just be prepared to keep him on your bench. Once again, I wouldn't drop him because the upside is still so high with him. And then Daniel Jones towards the end of that game also left. You might think that he just didn't come back in because it just didn't seem like it mattered at that point, but it was a neck injury. Seems mild. I don't think it's anything serious in this case, but the real issue here is if you're worried about Daniel Jones on your fantasy team, we have to talk. And then at receiver for Houston, at one point Robert Woods did leave the game with a rib injury, but he came back, seems like he's fine. But Tank Dell did not, and this sounds like a concussion, so you know the drill. He's going to go through the protocol. This year, the way it's played out, for the most part, players are missing the following week, so a good chance there will be no Tank Dell in week 6. And Zay Jones had just come back for the Jacksonville Jaguars in time to catch a touchdown against Buffalo, and then he left that game with a knee injury. This one sounds like it is going to cause him to miss possibly several weeks. And then in the, it really doesn't matter too much in fantasy, but we have to report it anyways category. 2 Patriots receivers did leave that game. Juju Smith-Schuster and Demario Douglas both left with head injuries. So that leaves a bunch of other guys that you really don't need to worry about for fantasy. And then back on Thursday, the first injury of the week that really mattered was Khalil Herbert, and that's an ankle injury. They've already said he's going to miss 2 to 3 weeks, maybe longer. So at this point, with also Rashawn Johnson leaving with concussion, If he clears the protocol, it was Thursday, a little bit earlier, he might have more time. But if both these guys miss, then it could be D'Onta Foreman who actually gets action for the first time this season. Now, time for the top waiver wire pickups heading into week 6. Let's talk about a Kansas City Chief who, well, really doesn't need an injury to a player like Kelsey or anybody to thrive. I mentioned on the beat, the breakout, the early waiver wire pickups to go and stash Rashee Rice. And sure enough, he scored a touchdown. He was due. He was getting targeted in the red zone, had the great matchup, and it happened. Not a big line, only 4 catches for 33 yards, but he's still getting used along with all the other receivers in that offense a fair amount. He could easily hit pay dirt again next week because this is one of the reasons I said to go out and grab him, because this schedule is so good for the Chiefs, as if they need any more help. But they get Denver this coming week, and we already know Denver's defense, not just horrific, but specifically to wide receivers, they are allowing the second most yards per target. And they've allowed 6 touchdowns to wide receivers in 5 games. That's tied for third most. But then it continues because the following week, they get the Chargers, also one of the worst against receivers, and then they get the Broncos again. Look, bye weeks, injuries. Rice is a guy who, look, does not have week winning upside or anything like that, but I am perfectly happy to just slot him in my flex or replace a wide receiver spot with somebody who's injured, set and forget for the next month. Now let's get back to Emari Demercado of the Arizona Cardinals. This is a guy who wasn't drafted, was not really on anybody's radar, but he's earned that number 2 spot. This is kind of a Jaleel McLaughlin-esque to me, somebody who is undersized, again, didn't put up big numbers in college, although he did play for a major program at TCU, unlike McLaughlin. But look, this guy has an overall skill set. He can catch the ball. He looked pretty good as a runner. Took a little time to get going, but this guy does not have a lot of carries under his belt this season. He might have to carry the load. I can't say that he has standalone value right now. I mean, he had been just a handcuff, and then now, of course, the Connor injury is what makes him relevant. But if Connor is going to miss time, especially if it's multiple weeks because it's a knee injury, I think Demercado is a strong add, especially for Connor owners. The other injury replacement at running back that I mentioned earlier is D'Onta Foreman, Chicago Bears. Foreman's hardly touched the ball this year, and it wasn't just that he's been hurt or anything. He's been a healthy scratch. But he's the next man up. It's his turn because Khalil Herbert definitely going to miss a couple of games. Bears did sign Foreman because they liked him. They thought that he could be part of this backfield. Remember that last year after the Panthers traded Christian McCaffrey, Foreman went on to almost go for a 1,000-yard season despite only starting 9 games, and he averaged 4.5 yards per carry. He's shown that he's able to carry the load. If he's going to get all the touches in this backfield, I mean, this isn't the ideal situation here, obviously in Chicago, who now is not really running the ball that much. They're just letting Justin Fields sling it, which is nice. But he's got the volume, the opportunity, touchdown upside. I think Foreman, especially going against the Vikings this weekend, might be an interesting play. And then next at running back, I'm going to say I finally have come around on Tyjae Spears of the Titans. I wasn't sure whether he'd pan out in the NFL. He has so far, but even more so than we expected. And you know what? He's slowly showing that he might have standalone value. In week 5, he totaled 69 yards and a touchdown. You know, that's not overwhelming, but when you look at the fact that Derrick Henry in the same game had a total of 62 yards and no touchdowns. This is the second time in 5 games that Spears has outscored Henry. Even more interesting is that this is the third time in 5 games that he has outsnapped Henry. He's on the field more, and he's more involved as a pass catcher. Is it possible that Spears ends the season with more fantasy points than Derrick Henry? I don't think so. But that's besides the point. Henry's a guy, you take what you get, and that's it. But if Spears is also going to have this complementary role and be effective and be used as a receiver on occasion, he does have value other than just being a handcuff. So somebody that you can stash, especially for bye weeks against so many injuries still, especially at running back. Spears is one of the guys I'm now feeling better about. Now with bye weeks, you need to make some waiver wire moves to cover for guys who are on your bench out of necessity. It's also a smart time to make some adds for players who are coming off the bye that may have been dropped out of necessity. So I'm going to go back to Josh Palmer. Mike Williams out for the season. Gerald Everett banged up and not really been too involved in this offense. Josh Palmer is clearly the number 2 target there behind Keenan Allen. Let's remember that in week 4, right before their bye, Josh Palmer was the leading receiver on the team. He actually had 77 yards and was targeted 8 times. Both of those were more than Keenan Allen. People are still going to be looking at Quentin Johnson, and I'm still going to say he's not ready. Palmer is the guy who's going to be ahead of him. He's going to be the clear number 2 target in this very fantasy-friendly, pass-heavy offense. And while Austin Eckler comes back and think, yeah, they'll run the ball more, but the fact that every one of their really good defenders is hurt means this defense is still going to stink, and they're still going to have to pass the ball a ton. Now, there is a rookie receiver who I'm looking to add right now, despite the fact he's also done absolutely nothing this season. I think this is the time to grab JSN. That's Jackson Smith-Njigba in Seattle. Now, props to Matt Harmon, friend of the show. We had him on a few months ago, if y'all saw that live stream. So he made a very good point, which is something that we have to take note of. Seattle has been without their starting left and right tackle, 2 of the best offensive linemen, not just their 2 best offensive linemen, but 2 of the better ones in the division. Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas have been out. Cross with a toe injury, Lucas was on IR. Now, they both could come back in week 6, but because of this, not only has the offense just not been as efficient, they've been using a lot more 2 and 3 tight end sets to compensate for the lack of blocking. That means more tight ends in the field, less of your number 3 receiver, which has been JSN, because you're not taking DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett off the field. That's why JSN hasn't really been on the field as much, and that's also why he's getting such short, skimpy targets. With this patchwork offensive line, which, by the way, besides just the tackles, also their center had been hurt. They had another offensive lineman out. It's basically all a bunch of backups here trying to block in front of Geno Smith. So they're trying to get the ball out fast, which is why Jackson Smith-Njigba, not being the downfield threat yet that Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are, he's had an average depth of target of 2.8. A total of 55 air yards over 4 games. That's not going to do it for fantasy, but there's a reason behind it. So if this comes together now, we could see him not only out there more, but also running more routes, but running better routes, not just standing there behind the line of the scrimmage and waiting for a dump off. I do think it will take some time before he's really startable in fantasy, but I'm very interested to see what he does this coming week on the road against the Cincinnati Bengals, who obviously are back on offense. Maybe Seattle has to pass a lot more. Maybe JSN is involved, so I'm very interested, and I want to grab him before his breakout game happens. And then finally, I'm going to go back to another Bear, believe it or not. Like, I know it's a 2-man show, right? It's just been Justin Fields and DJ Moore. At some point, defenses are going to have to figure out, hey, we just need to stop DJ Moore. That could leave some more targets open for Darnell Mooney, clearly the number 2 guy there. Clearly because Chase Claypool, of course, is finally out of town, and there's nobody else who's really making a dent other than the tight end Cole Kmet. Now, Mooney has been pretty disappointing. He's got 2 games where he had 4 catches, minimal yardage, and he's got 3 games where he had 0 catches. Mooney's a good receiver. We've seen him do it before. I think he's going to have to be involved at some point, and this is a good chance to see what he can do because, again, they play the Vikings. Also a good string of opponents for wide receivers. Chicago gets Minnesota, then they get the Raiders, and then they get the Chargers the next 3 games. We know he's a quality player. We know now his opportunity is going to improve, and the matchups are great. So all told, I think we could see some solid performances from Mooney. Those are the players you should be going out to add on their waiver wire ahead of this week. But who should you start? Who should you sit? Who should you be panicking about? Who should you be buying? We got it all for you. Check out our Week 6 playlist right here.